This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors: David and Mark Goodman, the Vancouver Courier newspaper, Vancouver lawyers Dumal and Boscovich, So this is a typical piece that I got in the mail today, just sold. Won't tell you the exact address, of course, but on the west side of town, West 13th, sold for more than $600,000 over asking, probably sold in a day and a half. Look, folks, across the street from me and down the street, two houses last month were both put on the market the same weekend. They had an open house, both houses. They both asked 1.08, $1,080,000. Both sold that weekend for 1.8. 700,000 over asking, 70% over asking. So we know, as my agent says, the market isn't hot, it's on fire. He says he's never seen it like that. Is that a good thing? Many of us think it's good. Many of us think it's not so good. Certainly, if you are 30 years old and you are a young couple with a baby, good luck trying to find, unless you hit the lotto, how are you going to move into Vancouver other than in a 400 square foot condo? It's going to be very, very difficult. And as someone who's been concerned with city planning and with public policy issues for most of his life, has raised a very thorny and I think not very popular question. Should we limit foreign ownership for residential property? That person is Peter Ladner, who, as you know, was a Vancouver City Councillor for many, many years, started business in Vancouver, which continues to be one of the great publishing stories, I think, in Canadian history. Really, it's a great, huge success, and does 4,200 other things, including just about to publish his own your first book, The Urban Food Revolution, Changing the Way We Feed Cities. Hello, Peter. It's great to see you. So you've caused a heck of a bees stir with this story, foreign property buyers restrictions needed. That's the question mark. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, David, I too got one of these folders,
yes,
which got me going,
yeah,
and it said you can triple your investment in a short time and so on. And I think about my own home I bought in 2000. It's worth 4 times what I paid for it now.
Exactly.
And I asked myself, is it always a good thing that property values go up? Because when you read the paper, you will always, or listen to the news or just the general buzz around town, property values up, good thing.
Yes.
Property values down, bad thing.
Right.
And when you start to look, though, at what happens in an insanely hot market, which is how one real estate agent described this one,
yes,
you can start to identify some bad things about property values being too high.
Like?
Vancouver is the 3rd most unaffordable city in the world.
Next to Hong Kong?
Hong Kong and Sydney.
Okay.
So if you were on an average income in Vancouver and you wanted to buy an average priced home, there would have to be 9 of you in that home generating that income to pay for that home.
Yes.
So what?
Which explains federal liberal immigration policies, but that's another story.
So what happens? Well, one thing that happens is it erodes the economy of the city.
Yes.
Because businesses can't hire people, because no one can move here. No, you can't bring people in here because they can't afford to buy a home.
I think you told the story in one of the pieces you wrote about a mining executive who says he can't bring mining executives to Vancouver because they don't want to pay the prices.
Mining company chief financial officer,
Yikes.
Big 6-figure salary.
Sure.
Cannot afford to move to Vancouver. And then since then, I've heard about another one that really got me was 2 surgeons, man and a wife, surgeons, cannot afford to to buy a home in Vancouver.
Mr. and Mrs. Surgeon.
Mr. Doctor and
Yeah,
Mrs. Doctor and Doctor Surgeon, actually.
Unbelievable, unbelievable, yeah.
And then I hear stories about companies that they want to expand.
Yes.
They need workers. They can't find them here because all the young people here are somewhere else because they can't afford to live here.
Yeah.
They hire people, they recruit people from Toronto, Seattle, wherever. The people take one look at the housing prices and say, I can't move here. So now the company's thinking about moving to Waterloo. We have a declining number of companies in Vancouver, head offices in Vancouver.
Yes, of course.
And when the Vancouver Economic Development Commission surveyed 60 CEOs and said, what's keeping you from expanding or building your business here?
Yep.
Number one thing was the price of property, which is related to this. Number two was the shortage of skilled labor, which is also because of housing costs. So there are, and then of course there's just the moral thing. I have 4 kids, and they're 3 in their 20s and 1 in their 30s, and they're never going to be able to afford to live in Vancouver because they're not already in the market. So you've also got a dividing rich and poor thing that destabilizes the society and leads to all kinds of unpleasant consequences. And you've got a case where people who move here, new immigrants who want to move here, work hard, make their way and get a hold of some economic security, can't happen.
2 weeks ago, I had breakfast with a former mayor, who you know we won't mention, one that you might like, not one that you might not like.
I like them all.
Yeah, and he is selling his house, and they're building a kind of duplex so that their quite successful son can occupy the duplex with them side by side, right? I mean, everybody has to be incredibly creative unless you're a multimillionaire.
Well, if you're in the market, you are a multimillionaire. And so there are a lot of people who love it this way and put a lot of pressure on to keep the good things coming. But I think it's time to look at the downside of it and say, are we really in a net gain position, or are we actually losing? Because then the other part of it is, you get a city that's basically a resort. It's all hollowed out. There's no real work here. There's a few fancy people at the top and a few people serving them at the bottom, or a lot of people serving at the bottom, coming in from Langley or wherever it is, or crunched together in some little condo or basement suite. And you've got no real vibrant city. Artists can't live here because they can't afford, so you don't have a real community, and young people are leaving, and we spend all this money educating our kids, and then they got to take off.
And
we lose all that money.
And what you're saying is that the illusion that Vancouver presents to the world, a city run by condos and latte, is in fact becoming the reality.
The biggest industry in this city is real estate. And
now, hasn't it always been the case?
It has.
I mean, this city was built, and I think you said this in one of your articles, on land speculation.
Yep. But, you know, there's a good thing. There are times when it's good, and then there are times when it gets out of control. And now today, you add in this element of people who come here who don't even want to live here. They just want to invest in housing stock as an investment asset. And those people compound the problem.
So I have a wonderful neighbor 2 doors over from Nanjing, and his lovely wife and this terrific little boy, Tony, and they bought this fabulous house. It's worth just under $2 million now. And his biggest question to me is, should I sell this house and invest in White Rock or Coquitlam? This is his major concern. Now, when I say neighbor, he doesn't live there. I only see him for a month or so at a time because he goes back to Nanjing, runs his business. The boy who studied a bit of English has forgotten most of it because now he's back in Mandarin-speaking school, you know, which is natural. So, are you literally suggesting that we should pass laws that limit the right to buy property by people who don't live here? Because or are you just trying to start, you said you're just trying to start the debate.
I think there should be a debate, and I think that we should get some data. We should discuss what we could do. We don't just jump in there and start saying you can't buy here if you're from out of town.
Right.
But what are the actual costs of this city being so unaffordable? And if they're really as great as I think they might be, then what are the options?
Well, tell us about some other cities. You've said that they've enacted this kind of legislation universally in China, but also in Sydney, Australia, and where else?
Well, I would start by, I just throw this out as a kind of a, somebody prove me wrong.
Okay.
That Canada is the easiest place in the world for foreign investors to come in and buy property.
Probably.
And there's the fewest barriers.
Yes.
In the States, at least you have to pay income tax, but you don't have to do that here.
Okay.
So it may be that we've got the widest open door of any place in the world. Now,
In
other
every
places,
respect, not just in terms of property, but in many respects.
if you want to go to Japan and buy property, forget about it. If you want to go to Indonesia and buy property, forget about it. If you want to go to Mexico and buy waterfront, forget about it. If you want to go to Prince Edward Island and buy waterfront, you got to get special permission. You just can't go in there and do it.
Now, what have you said in that piece about the prairie provinces? I didn't quite understand that. You said something in one of your pieces about Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba have limits on foreign ownership. I didn't know that.
They do. In Alberta, I think you can't own more than 20 acres if you're from out of town or from some other country. In Manitoba, if you buy property, I think you have to farm it immediately or you start using it. You can't just sit on it. So the farmers are very, very well aware of this. But to Australia, which is an interesting example, and there are lots of others, Austria, Switzerland, Florida, if you are a foreign property owner, you pay a higher property tax rate.
Oh, really?
But in Sydney, they have now, and they had it, then they dropped it, then they brought it back again. Restriction, if you're from out of town, you cannot buy existing houses. So your house, David, would not be available to a foreign buyer.
Okay.
But they recognize the value of foreign money in investing in new stock. So if you want to build a new condo, you can bring in foreign money, but only to fill half the suites. And then the other half have to be for locals.
Yes.
If you own property and you move to Australia, and then you move away, you got to sell the property. You can't hang on to it while you're living somewhere else. And then you mentioned China. The irony of this is right now the wave is from China. Before it was us folks from England or wherever we came from, and there have been all the different waves. In New York, it's people from Russia. London, it's people from the Middle East. But in China right now, the people in China have recognized this problem and put the brakes on it. You cannot own more than a couple of homes in Shanghai.
That's right.
30 cities in China that have restrictions. So people from China say, I want to invest in real estate. Hey, Vancouver, here I come.
That's right, exactly. A friend of mine is from Suzhou, which is a city near Shanghai, and his dad is very wealthy, and he explained exactly that to me just the other day. All right, we're going to take a little breather. We come back. You raise the risk when you talk about limiting foreign ownership. Of course, you run the risk of being labeled a racist and so on. And we're going to just catch our breath and think about all that. And we'll come back with more. In the meantime, davidberner.com is the site to go to if you want to send us some email or check on our social media. And we take this moment to thank some of the good folks who helped bring this program to you here on Shaw Community TV, Cable 4. KCM Wealth Management. Vancouver lawyers Dumoulin Boscovich. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. David and Mark Goodman. Chinese buyers and other uber-rich investors have priced average citizens out of the Vancouver housing market, and there seems little chance of turning this around. Vancouver is now the third most unaffordable city in the world. This was the headline piece. Just below the headline, Vancouver's real estate gold rush is totally out of control. When Peter Ladner, our guest, first wrote this piece, and you've gotten some tremendous bad flack about this piece. Ethan Barron, writing in the province, pretty good writer in the province, always writes something worth reading, makes a big argument about how our economy depends so much on buying things from China. Why wouldn't we welcome more people from China?
I'm not averse to, if people want to come here and make a home here and
Yes.
buy a home and live here and contribute to the economy,
Yeah.
bring them on. I mean,
Yes.
I mean, sure, there need to be restrictions and everything, but that's not what my issue is.
What-
I'm mostly concerned about people who buy here and use our housing stock as an investment asset.
Period.
Period. And then they don't even want to be here. And there are places I talked to somebody from, lives in Kerrisdale.
Yes.
5 empty homes along his street
Yes.
that have been bought, and they're just sitting there.
Yeah.
And the caretaker comes and mows the lawn, and so the neighborhood gets hollowed out. The neighborhood businesses don't have traffic and business anymore as much, and the community is left with people hankering to live somewhere, and there's these empty houses. There's something really wrong
So
here.
if you were a parliamentarian or in the legislature, or you were king for a day or whatever it takes, what would you do? Would you say to people, look, you can come here from Harbin or Guangzhou and you can buy property, but you have to live here? Or would you say you can only buy 1 house or 2 houses?
Well, you know, you could look, as I said earlier, I don't pretend to have the answer.
Yeah, okay.
And I think smart people should be looking for the answer. But I don't hear anybody talking about this or looking for the answer.
Well, it's a delicate thing. You don't want to. People are afraid to offend people. You know?
Well, I think it's even a little deeper and darker than that. It's the places you would expect to go to do the research
Yes.
are financed and held up by the real estate industry.
Ah.
You know, the mainstream media are very much dependent on real estate advertising. I mean, my own company that I was involved with, Business of Vancouver Media Group, we have a Western investor real estate publication.
And this program is supported by a major real estate player.
So there's a lack of interest in examining these questions. And
Yes.
you could do things like a higher property transfer tax if you're from out of the province.
Okay.
You could do things like a higher property tax. If you're not going to live here, you should pay more because you're not contributing in any other way to all the other amenities in this city, the sewers and whatever else.
Here's an interesting salient fact. The voting records for the last federal election, which was just a few days ago, 70% by and large across the country, on average, which is pretty great. And in Vancouver and in Toronto, 70% of the folks came out and voted. Richmond, 50%. Now there's a statement in there. It says that an awful lot of the people in Richmond, and I have friends who live in Richmond, are not engaged in public life.
Well, that's a whole other question, and you
But it's
would
related.
probably find, I'm going to Richmond on Sunday to talk about this at the Fairchild radio station.
Ah, very good.
People in the Chinese community have a lot of things that they're engaged with
Yes,
that
of
are
course.
that are
Yeah.
part of their own community, and
Yeah.
and it's not like they're not engaged, but they're maybe not engaged with the federal government. But if you're involved in politics, as I have been, you'll know that
Yes.
people from every kind of community are actually quite engaged in politics.
What would happen if somebody, let's say we had this debate, let's say that conclusions were drawn and that whatever level of government made some step to limit foreign ownership. What do you think? Let's forget about the morality, the ethics, the sociology. What would be the practical economic result of doing that, do you think?
Well,
You do-
again, we don't even know to what extent the housing prices are being driven by this overseas investor speculation. We hear these stories. You've got your stories. I've got my stories. But
No.
maybe it's all about the interest rates, really. But we don't know. But I think you can safely assume that a good part of it, especially in your fancy neighborhood where you live, David,
Yes.
is driven by
This is the millionaire calling the pauper a millionaire.
Yeah.
Okay.
is driven by this kind of speculation.
Yeah.
So then I think you could expect that the housing prices would dampen. The increases would go down. I don't think the bottom would fall out.
No,
but
I don't think so either.
It would slow it down. It would dampen it.
Yes.
And I think that would be a good thing.
It wouldn't be suddenly become more affordable. Look, it's the same thing as the recent council decision, which I applaud, to work out the Canby corridor. In other words, to let real estate grow around the nodes of the Canby corridor. I think it's an obvious thing. It's had to happen. That's what happens around things like that. But the notion that was tacked on at the end of that otherwise reasonable decision, that this would somehow provide affordable housing, is laughable.
Well, you bring up a good point. It's not just about dampening the demand. You've got to increase
Yes.
the supply too. And
Yes.
there are supply constraints that are driving up the price as well, starting with the resistance in a lot of single-family neighborhoods to putting any density in there.
Absolutely. My neighborhood is like that.
So-
But 2 blocks away, there are duplexes, front and back duplexes, side-by-side duplexes, all over Kitsilano there are duplexes. But I live in this Tony neighborhood where, I mean, nobody would consider that. And I walk in my neighborhood all the time, and I see properties, and I look at a property going for sale that's on a corner, half a block off 10th Avenue, and I go, wow, I wish I had the money. I'd buy this property and build a quadruplex. You know?
Well,
but they won't let me.
One,
Of course, I don't
one
have the money.
interesting suggestion was
Yes.
that people who buy, offshore buyers want a big property and they want a big house, and oftentimes they want to build a big new house.
Yes, yes.
So another thing you could do would
Yes.
be to say that if you have an old house and you want to tear it down, you can't build a bigger house. You have to build duplex or triplex in there. And that would make, sort of force more supply on the one hand, and also discourage some of these investors because they wouldn't want to buy that property if they had to build a triplex. They don't want a triplex. They want a single family home.
I'm trying to think of the real estate people listening to this, watching this, what they would say to that.
That was a real estate developer who told me that suggestion. He
Really?
said, don't mess with the market and don't try to stop people from coming here and investing their money,
Yes.
but change the terms so that when they invest it, the community benefits as well as the owner, if they want to, they're going to add value to the property. But there are some people who wouldn't do that, and that would keep them out of the market. And if they did come in, they'd create something that was good for the community.
You know, the airplane changed everything, didn't it? And the microchip. We have universal, on this globe, we have universal migration now. You know, migration used to be 200, 300 years ago, fairly localized, other than some of the great famous migrations. But you know, and after certain wars, we had people crossing one great body of water and so on. But now, every country is radically different, is radically changed. And it causes all kinds of social friction and psychological friction. You know, the people in England, there are more mosques than churches. You know? Everywhere all over the world, there's all this friction of different people sort of changing the local DNA.
Well, a new thing that's going to happen here, it's starting to happen, in fact, is part of what's going on with some of these Chinese buyers.
Yes, yes.
The ones who want to move here is they're environmental refugees. Like there are people who have never seen a blue sky in China who come
yes.
here. And I saw one story where some kid, 8-year-old kid, looked up and was shocked at the clouds in the sky and asked, Mom, what is that? Is there something wrong?
Yes.
No, son, that is what actually a cloud looks like in the sky. I'd never seen a cloud in the sky before.
Yeah, one of my dearest friends is from Guangzhou, and we were once walking along Jericho Beach, and on the other side of the walkway is this endless parkland. And he said, you know, David, there's nowhere in the city that I grew up that looks like this. That's a city of 17 million people. Most Canadians have never heard of, you know. And we drove to the Okanagan once, and he said, you cannot drive anywhere in China for 2 hours and not see a house. And he said, this is astonishing to him. That we drive through the interior of British Columbia, and all you see are trees.
So we're going to have environmental refugees coming here.
Yes.
And I think we should just make sure that it's our place. We can, and I mean everybody who's living here. We should be able to set the terms so that it benefits the community and it doesn't just benefit the person coming in who takes money and goes somewhere else with it.
Well, Peter, give me a process. How would we? You've said, look, I'm not saying we should limit foreign ownership. I'm saying we have to at least have the conversation. How would you start that conversation other than appearing on pieces like this?
Well, it's, you know, I don't know the answer to that. Yesterday, I was contacted by two young people.
Yes.
One's family is from Korea, the other's family is from China. They are really, really incensed about this issue.
Oh.
And they work in business here, and one of them has just bought a place, a little place in the West End with her husband, who's a well-paid job. I think he's a lawyer. The other one can't find a place to work, to live. They are involved in companies that are struggling to find people. They really want to do something. And they're prepared to, so we're going to start, I don't know, a Facebook page, or they're going to start a Facebook page. See what happens. I don't know. But I also think there's so many people have talked to me about this. I was saying to you at the break that the Chinese community is very concerned about this, because the Chinese people who are here, many of them don't have parents with homes that is going to give them the money that they can then have their home. They're working for a living, and they're getting pushed out by, and they can see who's pushing them out, and they're not happy. So I think that there's a great untapped interest in this topic, frustration and anger, and willingness to take some steps. And I'm just curious to see who's going to step out politically and take a risk on this one.
Who finally would have to make that kind of a decision? If a decision would it be municipal councils?
If it was, if you wanted to set a differential property tax rate for unoccupied homes, it would be a city council. If you wanted to increase the property tax, transfer tax, it would be the province. If you wanted to say, if you want to live here the way they do in the States, you got to pay income tax here, that would be the federal government. But the federal government, you know, this is not an issue in other parts of Canada, the way it is here.
Although it is married to issues of immigration. Yeah, almost half the residents of Vancouver and Toronto were born outside the country. This is a Douglas Todd piece in the paper the other day. 100,000 more immigrants per year would boost the gross domestic product and add to government coffers and so on. Yeah, well, look, I think it's great that you're starting the conversation. You know,
well, it's one of those things. I just, Dave,
like to see what happens.
I just went through this this fight against the casino in Vancouver, and I found that when you give people an opportunity, something to rally around, you say that somebody shows up and says, "I don't think this is a good idea." You find suddenly you discover a lot of people are saying, "I was thinking exactly the same way, but I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know there was anything you could do about it." And I think people don't realize that you can do something about this. It's done in Australia, it's done in Florida, it's done in Europe, it's done in Japan, it's done all over the world.
And we're done here. We're out of time. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, David.
When we're finished, we can ask the opinion of Jay, who's from Korea. Okay. Thanks, everybody. That was great. We hope you think it was great. We thought it was great. So next week, we're going to look at the power of social media in terms of affecting public policy. Can it? Does it? And our guest will be Dr. Raul Pacheco Vega from a political science department at UBC. But his real claim to fame is he's one of the most famous Twitter guys in Vancouver. Has zillions of followers. DavidBurner.com is our website, and we thank you again for being here on Shaw Community TV Cable 4.